Well, first of all, can I wish you good afternoon and welcome to the unveiling of the plaque to focus on the achievements of Dr. Bruce and the Scottish expedition. Firstly, thank you all for coming along here to Scots and indeed for their generous hospitality. A very big thank you to Stephen Benny, because that was a gentleman, is there, right, okay, who is allowing us to put the plaque up at the entrance to Troon Yacht Haven. That's a good idea. Now, here I'm going to give you some history. Back in 2002, as chairman of the Troon Business Association, I had pleasure of welcoming Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, to this very room. Her Royal Highness was the patron of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society's centenary celebrations commemorating the very successful Scottish National Antarctic Expedition. Due to lack of time to plan that event, we gave little thought to a lasting legacy to tell the story in Troon. This was rectified on the island of Cumbria when we had a plaque erected at Keppel Slip to celebrate the Scotia's return in 1904. In 2018, Roger Watts, my good friend sitting beside me here, and myself put on a very successful exhibition in Troon Library of Scotland's place in Antarctic exploration. Out of that exhibition came the idea that we should have a plaque in Troon, similar to the one unveiled by the Princess Royal in Millport. Today, 20 years late, and 120 years to the day that the Scotia sailed from Troon on her way to Antarctica, the plaque is ready to be unveiled. I will now pass you on to Dr. David Munro, formerly of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society, to tell you a little bit about the achievements of the Scotia expedition as a tribute to the men of Ayrshire Shipbuilding Company who rebuilt her in the dry dock just alongside us. David.
George, thank you very much for inviting me here today to join you all in this continued celebration of the life and the work, not only of William Speirs Bruce, but also of the men of the Ayrshire shipyard who built him, or refitted rather, his fabulous vessel, the Scotia. Now, when I became director of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society in 1966, I discovered in the archive a wonderful array of photographs, maps, and manuscripts that told the story of William Bruce, and in particular the story of the voyage of the Scotia, his research ship. William Bruce was a key figure in launching what they call the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, which really kicked off in 1895 when there was a meeting of the International Geographical Congress in London. And the statement put out at the end was, and this had been repeated by Bruce several times beforehand, that the last great place on Earth to explore was Antarctica. And of course, he wanted to be involved in that process. Unfortunately, he didn't get a place on the British Antarctic expedition led by Robert Falcon Scott, but he decided to launch his own Scottish expedition. And to acquire a ship involved advice from good friends, Colin Archer, a Scottish marine architect, and Fridtjof Nansen, a well-known explorer from Norway. And they found a ship, an ex-whaling ship called the Hecla, and it was bought for £16,000, and it sailed down to Scotland, down to Troon, where it was to be refitted to a design by George Watson, who was one of the most preeminent marine architects of his time, very well known. And it was ready for sailing in good shape on the 2nd of November, 1902. And the ship had a journey ahead of it, a round trip of 33,000 miles down to Antarctica and back. So why was this expedition so special, and what really did it achieve? Well, essentially what Bruce did was to establish the very first permanent research station in Antarctica. He thought it's all very well just dashing down, doing a summer's work, and then dashing home again. We really need a permanent station. And in the process, he created the longest operating meteorological station in Antarctica. And that was on one of the Orkney Islands called Laurie Island. And Bruce established that in 1903, and it's still operating. Today it's now run by the Argentine Meteorological Service. So a great achievement. But not only that, Bruce arranged and carried through a detailed survey of the Weddell Sea in the South Atlantic. This had never been done before. And that was a great achievement. And in the process, the collection of a huge number of natural history specimens was a remarkable achievement. It was probably the biggest collection of any of the expeditions heading off during the heroic age. And this was brought back to Edinburgh, where Bruce established a Scottish oceanographical laboratory. And there he lodged all his specimens that he collected on his various expeditions. So what enabled him? How did he come to end up being a preeminent Scottish, British, or world polar explorer? Well, as a youngster, born in London, he was brought up largely by a grandfather who took him to all the museums in town. And as a youngster, he learnt a lot, and he created a great passion for natural history and for science. And when he came north to Edinburgh, first of all to study at a summer school and then to study medicine in Edinburgh University, he extended his passion for science. And in fact, he worked with eminent people like John Murray and Hugh Robert Mill, and was engaged in sorting out a lot of the data from another great expedition, the Challenger expedition, which set off 150 years ago. And he got involved with all this data, and I can see him, I'm a mind's eye seeing him sitting there with all this wonderful data saying, I need to get off on an expedition like this. And that was to happen eventually. And not only one expedition, but 5 expeditions. One of them was down to Antarctica on a whaling expedition launched from Dundee. 2 were expeditions to the Arctic organized by well-to-do businessmen. One of them was James Coates of Paisley fame. And then he was fortunate to bump into a really great man who was one of the fathers of modern oceanography. And that was Prince Albert I of Monaco. And they met in Tromsø in northern Norway. Bruce was coming south with the Coates family, heading back home. And Prince Albert I of Monaco was heading north up to Svalbard. We're hearing a lot about Svalbard in the press these days. Prince Albert said to Bruce, why don't you jump ship and just join me, and let's go back together to Svalbard. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that lasted the rest of their lives. So the experience of working with Prince Albert got him in contact with a whole array of Europe's greatest oceanographers and scientists and natural historians. And that was invaluable to Bruce in learning more about polar regions. And he also learned from Prince Albert I a lot about the technology. Prince Albert had been redesigning things like the equipment for measuring the depth of the ocean. used to do it by slinging a rope over the side with a weight on the end, and that was no good. And so Prince Albert invented one with 3 strands, like piano wire, twisted together. And that was much more successful. So Bruce is learning all the time to add to his great passion for exploration. And we hear today often people talking about Bruce and the expedition, the Voyage of the Scotia, as talking about forgotten men. Well, I think Bruce is far from forgotten. And I don't just mean all we've been doing to celebrate the life and work of Bruce in the Royal Scottish Geographical Society through the Scotia Centenary. I remember Princess Anne at the end of 2 years of Scotia Centenary saying this is the longest centenary celebration I've ever been involved with. But Bruce has been well remembered. When he died in 1921, 2 years later, there was a medal that was presented for the first time and continues to be presented, the Polar Medal, Bruce Medal. And the Bruce Medal is for those who have carried out work in polar regions. And it's awarded almost every 2 years. Bruce left a huge legacy along with all the other scientists. There were 6 scientists on board the Scotia, and he was one of them. And a huge legacy of scientific work, published in book form, published in paper form. And there were 3 biographies of William Bruce, one in 1923, one in 2003, and one a couple of years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So he's certainly well remembered there. But I think if he came back today, he would be really pleased to see what's going on in terms of marine science in Scotland. The work of the Scottish Association for Marine Science, which 20 years ago opened up a lecture hall dedicated to William Spears Bruce. And then there's the Marine Scotland Laboratory Facility up in Aberdeen, which has used a research vessel since Bruce's time called Scotia. We're now on Scotia number 4, a multi-million-pound research vessel. And I think he would be proud to see the Scotia a rising phoenix-like, because his original Scotia came to an end in 1916 during the First World War, when it caught fire and sank off the Welsh coast. And also today, we have reconnected, in Scotland, we've reconnected with Monaco. And that was achieved, first of all, by asking Prince Albert II of Monaco to be a co-patron with Princess Anne of the Scotia Centenary Program. And then I was invited to join the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee of the Prince Albert Foundation, promoting conservation and environmental protection. And at the moment, I've been busy developing projects between Edinburgh University, Geoscience at Edinburgh, and the foundation. So we've managed to get some considerable funding for a variety of projects, and the current one is on training ocean leaders of the future. So I think this is a worthy way of remembering the life and the achievements of William Spears Bruce. So as George said a little earlier to me, I think you could go on talking the rest of the afternoon about Bruce. But just to finish, we still remember Bruce in many different ways today. And we also are here and we remember the men of the Ailsa shipyard. When Watson put together the plan for its refitting in the harbour here, I think it instilled in the workers that there was something special going on. This was a very special boat, a very special ship. It was going off to Antarctica and would achieve great things. A historic achievement was the results of that expedition. And I think we should always remember William Spears Bruce, a man who should be remembered and not forgotten. Thank you.
Well done, David, keeping it short. Sorry, you were not supposed to laugh there. Anybody who wishes to speak to David afterwards, I'm quite sure will have the opportunity. Now, in 2018, Dr. Vanessa Collingridge opened that exhibition that Roger and myself put on in Troon Library. It's now a privilege to ask her just to say a few words before she unveils the plaque today. Vanessa.
I'm going to come this way. Hello everyone, and firstly thank you so much for braving the almost Antarctic weather that we've got today, the wind and the rain, to come out to take part in this really fantastic and joyful commemoration celebration of the remarkable feats, not only of William Speirs Bruce and his men, but also of the legacy, the heritage that comes from Troon as well, and also from Paisley. I know that there's a member of the Coates family here. So, just as William Speirs Bruce realised more than perhaps anyone that you can't have those kind of achievements on your own, I'd like now to just pay tribute to two remarkable men, George Mulvaney and Roger Watts, in association with the late Jim Goodlad, who have done so much work to really put William Speirs Bruce's legacy literally on the map of this area, both in Cumbria, both here, and just in terms of our knowledge of this remarkable feat. So, gentlemen, thank you for all your work, keeping William Speirs Bruce's name and his achievements and the achievements of everybody associated with this expedition over the years and the knowledge over the years still going. It was my great privilege in 2002 to 3 to take part in the Scotia Centenary expedition back down to the Antarctic island of South Georgia. And we did some really important work there. David referenced some of the work that's still going on in terms of oceanography, marine science. And we did a small part of that down in that expedition there, looking at climate change. I'm sure Bruce would have been absolutely thrilled that his legacy in terms of all his meteorological and scientific work was still continuing 100 plus years later. But without further ado, I would like now to reveal this plaque. So I'll give you this. And ladies, gentlemen, everyone, and particularly the school children at the back, this is yours to continue, keep going forward. I give you the William Speirs and the Scotia plaque. Do come up and have a read. It contains some fabulous information and also some photographs and drawings as well. So do come along and have a look. It's a brilliant achievement. So well done, gentlemen. One round of applause for the gentlemen. Well done, Roger. Well done, George.
Margaret. Thank you, both speakers, and thank you very much indeed for unveiling the plaque. Now, Colin Blair, Managing Director of Buzzworks, would like to invite you to partake of the small buffet luncheon. Thank you, Colin, and your staff. I don't know where you are, but you've gone. I hope you all take the chance to network with each other. And both Roger and myself would be happy to hear of any background stories, whether you come from Troon, whether you come from Millport and our Millport contingency couldn't make it today, or even Antarctica. Please tell us the stories. Enjoy yourself, ladies and gentlemen, and come and see the plaque. Thank you.
David Munro, could you give me an idea of why this voyage was so important and how it is less well known than those of Scott and others?
Well, the voyage of the Scotia is really important, and most important, I think, because it was a scientific expedition. That was the aim of William Bruce as the leader of the expedition. And he wasn't interested in flying the Union Jack at the North Pole or the South Pole. This was not an adventurous trip in the sense of trying to get publicity out of it and raise funds on the back of that. This was all to do with science, and it was well planned in that respect. So Bruce didn't as far as I know, talked to many journalists about his journey. And that's part of what makes it an attractive expedition to examine. And it's quite different from the likes of Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, Nansen, and so on.
How did Coates get involved? How did Coates get involved with the financing of the expedition?
Well, the Coates got involved with Bruce the very first time he went to Antarctica in 1892. And the family were deeply impressed by how he behaved and his passion for natural history and science. So when he started to look for funds for the expedition in the Scotia, they knew all about him, and they knew all about his previous expeditions to the Arctic as well. So he had a good reputation as a passionate and knowledgeable scientist.
How did the picture come about of the penguin and the piper?
Oh, the famous Piper and the Penguin is a well-known image from that expedition. In 2004, Bruce had left on the Scotia the island of Laurie Island in the South Orkneys, and unfortunately, while they were trying to map the floor of the ocean in that part of the Weddell Sea and to map the coastline of Coates Land, they got stuck in the ice. And that was unfortunate. Bruce never wanted to have that happen. And he thought of a good way of keeping morale up by getting Gilbert Kerr, who played the pipes on board the ship, dressed up in full Highland dress, and he would play jigs, strathspeys, reels and marches to a penguin, a king penguin. And little do you realize from the photograph that the penguin is tied by the foot to the foot of Gilbert Kerr, the piper. And he dresses this up as a scientific experiment. What will the reaction of this bird be to the sound of bagpipes? Well, the answer was next to none at all. I think he was quite entertained by the pipe music. But this image was eventually converted into a postcard, which became the very first postcard mailed from Antarctica.
You said that the expedition didn't expect to become encased in the ice. Was that unusual when it happened to all others?
Well, it was unusual, but when the Scotia was sailing southwards towards the Antarctic continent, Bruce and the then chief engineer and the captain decided to back off because they could see the ice expanding, and they retreated to the South Orkney Islands. So they knew all about the dangers of ice and being trapped in the ice. There was a different ship's engineer. The original engineer died and was buried on Laurie Island, and the new engineer was picked up in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and I think he was a little less experienced in handling ships in these sorts of waters. But Bruce and Tom Robertson, the captain, were very clever in the ways they managed to free themselves from the ice, leaping up and down on board deck, doing all sorts of clever tricks. And eventually they managed to escape. And they didn't linger long. They just beetled straight north, back up to Scotland.
Why was Bruce rejected from the Scott expedition?
Well, there was some confusion over Bruce's desire to be part of the British Antarctic expedition. He had met Sir Clements Markham, who was the president of the Royal Geographical Society in London, and had expressed his interest in joining the expedition. But Clements Markham had other ideas. This was to be a naval expedition that they were going to send off southwards. And they never got back to Bruce to accept his offer. So what Bruce did was, Bruce thought, I'll put my own expedition together from Scotland. And he managed to get support from the Coates family, and off they went. But But Clements Markham accused Bruce of mischievous rivalry in organising this expedition, which he thought was not good form. And Bruce thought he was doing a great service to science by going to the Weddell Sea. Clements Markham and the Scott expedition, they were going to the Ross Sea, and so Bruce thought, well, we'll be able to tell him another story from the science we do in the Weddell Sea. He wasn't trying to be mischievous at all, but it darkened his expedition, and that I think is why none of the men of the Scotia were given the Polar Medal, and Bruce had to invent his own medal to give to them all.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Munro. Your information has been most helpful. Vanessa, in your talk earlier, you said that you had gone to the South Atlantic. Could you expand on that a little more for us, please?
So I was really, really fortunate that back in 2002, I was invited down on the centenary of the Scotia Voyage, which was called the Scotia Expedition, and that was going to study climate change down on the Antarctic island, or the peri-Antarctic island of South Georgia. Now, I was invited down because I'm a broadcaster, obviously, to trade, but I also have always been very involved academically as well. I was a geographer. Originally, I was trained as a geographer. My undergraduate degree is in geography and earth sciences, and I specialised in climate change. And so I'd always kept very interested in that. And so really I was a useful person, because not only could I be an extra pair of hands for the scientists doing their work, but once their work had finished and their day had finished, I would be typing it all up, sending it via the satellite link that used to come over, sending the copy back to the UK to write for the Daily Mail. I was filming for the BBC, ITV, making a Radio 4 documentary series on the Antarctic called Antarctic Diaries. And I made a documentary for Discovery as well on the climate change work that we were doing. So I kind of was wearing two hats down on that expedition. But it was phenomenal going down. It was my first experience of being down in the Antarctic, of seeing icebergs, and just the sheer size and scale of the icebergs. When you meet them for the first time, it is almost overwhelming. They are awesome, these huge bodies of ice. And you think that the Antarctic is going to be quiet, instead of which the wind roars. It absolutely ricochets and roars down the mountains. These katabatic winds go over and slide down the mountain. They bring whiteouts. I was knocked flat. So I'm about just over 8 stone. My backpack with all my gearing, because of course we had to carry all our gear around with us. So I was having 2 cameras, because you can't have one in case it breaks, 2 sound recording devices, all my own stuff, my Antarctic survey rations. So my backpack weighed 4 stone, so half my weight, and I was still getting knocked off my feet and ending up going like a turtle on my back. So no, it was an incredible experience. I went to the Falklands, so we flew with the Air Force from Brize Norton through Ascension Island down to the Falklands, and there we had a ship that we chartered, a yacht, that was our research vessel. So just in the way that William Spears Bruce and his team, the Scotia team, would have had their research, the Scotia, the research vessel, we had our own one, Ocean Tramp. She was a little bit probably more comfortable, but not as big. She was a 60-foot ocean-going ketch. And we used that as our research vessel for going and doing all our, we had various locations where we were taking samples of lake sediment cores and looking at glacier retreat, looking at the biodiversity, looking at the geology of the region as well. So the scientists on board were doing some really important scientific research when we were on the South Georgia island. And we had some fun as well. I celebrated my birthday down in South Georgia, and we were in a whiteout for my birthday. 3 days we were trapped inside a little cabin, one of the old whaling station cabins. And when we eventually emerged, the winds of the storm had blown in an iceberg, a mini iceberg, into the bay, into Husvik Bay. And On top of it, there were 3 chin-strap penguins walking up, sliding down, jumping in, and it was their playground. These penguins spent hours upon hours just playing on this new piece of equipment that has suddenly come into their area. But the wildlife was phenomenal. Obviously, you get a really strong sense of the heritage of the whaling industry. And of course, William Spears Bruce had gone on whaling expeditions in the past, and lots of the men who travelled, and probably some of the guys who were working on the Scotia, they would have worked on whaling ships as well. So a lot of our knowledge came from the commercial era of exploitation, that commercial era of whaling and sealing down in the South Atlantic. But thankfully, we were down on much happier terms. Rather than killing animals, we were down hopefully to understand more about the environment and the ecosystem down there and help preserve this really important, or conserve this really important environment for future generations. Unfortunately, we all know the way that climate change is going, don't we? So getting as much data as we can to make the arguments and to show that we haven't got time to wait. We can't wait another 100 years for a bicentenary of, or double centenary of William Spears Bruce's voyage. There won't be the Antarctic ice down there in 100 years' time. So it's very important that we do as much research as we can.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Lovely to meet you.
My name is Ron Lewis Smith, and I worked for the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge for the best part of 40 years, starting in the middle of the 1960s. And my work as a biologist took me to quite a number of locations in the Antarctic, but I started off in the South Orkney Islands, which is where, well, this celebration is all about. The island, I was in the South Orkneys, and I was based on Sydney Island, which is only about 20-25 miles from Laurie Island, where Bruce and his Scottish expedition were based back in 1902. As I say, I started off by working in the South Orkney Islands, and that led me, where I was promoted from the contract that I had with the British Antarctic Survey to a permanent post, and that allowed me to go and work on South Georgia on several occasions, back to the South Orkneys, down the Antarctic Peninsula, working at 1 or 2 stations down there, including Rothera, the base, the southern end of the Antarctic Peninsula, which is where most of the British Antarctic Survey work is done these days. I also worked with the Italians in Victoria Land, with the Australians at their station in Queen Elizabeth Land, and after my retirement I was successful in becoming a lecturer and guide with a tour company, a cruise company that went to the Antarctic, and I had many occasions down there which I was able to take my wife with me, and that was a great occasion on many times, because of course during my married life, when I was working with Bass, I was unable to take my wife, and it was also during that period of early retirement that I had a contract to work with the South Africans at their they have a research station in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the southern Indian Ocean, and I had to go there and by invitation of the South African government to assess the situation there, because they wanted to nominate their island, Marion Island, as a World Heritage Site. So that was really exciting in retirement. And I continued working on Antarctic topics well into retirement, writing articles, publishing things, and now I'm sort of definitely winding down, I think, now that I've reached a ripe old age.
My name is David Marshall, and I'm the head of geography at Mar College. And about 4 years ago, I think it was, George Mulvaney put on an exhibition at Troon Library about the Scotia. and was very, very kind to ask for our involvement in that and take kids along. And any donations or sponsorship that was left over was donated to the department. So we're very, very fortunate and therefore wanted to support him today as well. And we were very pleased to be invited along.
Your name and what do you think you made of this visit today?
I'm Beth McNair. I'm one of the school captains at Mark College, and I just think it's amazing to hear the history and what happened in our town and in Scotland. It's something very rare that we don't get to really experience or appreciate that much, so it's great to learn and meet all these people who are a part of it.
I'm Brooke Hailstone. I'm also one of the school captains. Here today to learn a bit about it so we can go back to the school and feedback and get people more knowledgeable about it.
So we'll go back and tell all the school about what we learned here today and the history behind it and everything that was very interesting towards us. I think it was really nice to meet everybody that was involved and learn all their history.
Our school captain, so we all meet a couple of times a week, so we'll probably put together a presentation or something, speak to Mr. Doherty, the head teacher, and then see if we can just spread it in maybe an assembly or in personal support for the rest of the students of the school.
My name's Nigel Rayner. I'm a member of Troon Probers Club and I was invited to come along to this ceremony today by George. My connection with the Antarctic is I've actually been there thanks to the Norwegian Hurtigruten Voyage people. January 2017 we set off for a 16-day holiday down to the Antarctica. Not for us the long sea journey that these guys undertook. We had the luxury of flying with KLM from Glasgow, Amsterdam to Santiago in Chile. So we left Glasgow on a winter's night, middle of winter. We get to Santiago the next day in the middle of a Southern Hemisphere summer. We eventually made our way down with a 4-hour flight to Punta Arenas, where we joined the expedition ship MS Midnight Sol. And that took us on a 16-day voyage to Antarctica. We actually called in at 4 or 5 islands en route, but actually landed on mainland Antarctica. And we visited Falkland Islands on the way back before coming back into Punta Arenas on the way back home. But for us, we were given Harley Hansen jackets from Hurtigruten. Nice blue jackets with a nice yellow hood, quite bright. We had thermal underwear, various thin layers of clothing, and waterproof trousers. I can certainly take my hat off to these early expedition people who were wearing reindeer skins and various other things. I understand one gentleman on the expedition had a tailored suit specially made in Savile Row. But we were out there the sort of tourist way, not the expedition way. But having experienced the conditions in Antarctica, albeit in summer, I think it's fantastic that the actual voyage set off from Troon. We came back 2 years later, and they were very much intrepid voyagers, taking scientists and 1 or 2 other people out with them. Obviously, they have to take their own supplies of food for a year and that sort of thing. We were on the luxury of a voyage, which was a cruise standard. You know, we'd taken all our things out, and food was available in Punta Arenas. So, not for us the actual long sea voyage, but yeah, fantastic to have been down there and seeing what conditions were like and what these people endured. And I think now it's absolutely tremendous. 120 years to the day that Scotia did set off, they've got this rather nice plaque to commemorate that.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Thank you.